Hello and welcome to Almost 30 Podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. It's Lindsey and Krista, your BFFs in all things change, transition, spirituality, health and wellness. And today we're talking about one of our favorite topics that I feel like we don't give enough airtime, which is communication.
I do.
Yeah,
I've been given airtime. I've been given airtime.
She's like, hire me to speak about communication.
Yeah, literally. Now, well, also with you, now that we are good at it together, especially, it's like addictive, but then you try and communicate in that way to other people and it doesn't always work. So today in conversation, we're going to have Charles Duhigg with his book, Supercommunicators, which is about communication, about a lot of things that we're going to be discussing in this intro. But it's something that Lindsey and I talk about quite a bit, just using our words. I think so many of us at the end of what we want in life is, or at the beginning of what we want in life is saying what we want and being able to express it, having deep relationships, like getting the job that we want. I think so much is missing. And I think we think so much about the lives that we want, but the only way we're going to have it is if we're able to speak it and actually make it happen. So I'm so excited about this conversation.
Me too. I had a blast is an understatement. I actually adore Charles. He's so kind, so warm. And honestly, he was modeling exactly what he wrote about in Supercommunicators. He truly is an incredible listener. He makes you feel seen, and is genuinely interested when he is in conversation. And I think what I was missing for most of my life in the communication realm was this importance that he talks about, which is the connection you have while you're communicating. So oftentimes we're so anxious and we're in our head and we're thinking about what we should say and how it should be said and is it perfect and is it clear? While those things can be important, what we're missing is what type of conversation are we having? What are we negotiating? He talks about negotiation. There's always a negotiation in a conversation. And negotiation has kind of a negative, serious connotation, at least for me, but it's less serious than that. And so if we can get on the same page and actually connect, we are going to have a much more fruitful conversation and be able to communicate our needs, desires, ideas clearly, and vice versa. Oftentimes we're having two different conversations, and we've seen this in sometimes interviews. Yeah. We've seen this in the business end of Almost 30. And we've had to really learn how to get on the same page as the people that we are talking to.
Yeah, it's something. So I was watching couples therapy again on my flight yesterday. Lindsey and I
can't wait to I need to catch up.
Girl, it's one of our favorite shows, couples therapy. So basically you kind of walk through the process of this therapist in New York takes these couples through a couples therapy journey. So each episode is diving into the relationship, sort of the problems, what they go through, all these things. That is like my ideal show. It's so fascinating. And it's so interesting to watch because you see all of the things that are unsaid. And you also can see, from the bird's eye view, you have this like really powerful perspective where you see kind of the communication confusion and breaks in how when we're in therapy, you're bringing things out from your mind into the world and you're speaking them. And you're just kind of really seeing the patterns of the mind where we're communicating and where it's so confusing for the other person and where we're missing people and on different pages. And it was such a reminder for me when I was watching it of how often we assume things, we completely keep everything in our head and we aren't speaking what's on our mind. And so we're not giving people the opportunity to understand us or be close to us or really know us. And there's so much that's lost in assumption. There's so much that's lost when things are unsaid. But so many people, because of fear, really stop themselves from speaking or stop themselves from going outside of the box and really leaning into a conversation, whether it's a good conversation or a hard conversation.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what can happen, especially in like more established relationships, is that you can bring these kind of sides of your personality, very specific sides of your personality to these moments of connecting and communicating that actually play into a dynamic that's not productive or healthy. And so what Charles talks about is actually encouraging the bringing of all of ourselves to conversations rather than just these like stereotypes or archetypes that we tend to lean into.
Yeah, I love that. That's why I just love parts work so much. As an example, I had a hard conversation the other day, and in parts work, you're able to kind of bring the multiple experiences that you are having. And by talking about things in parts, you're able to unblend it from you and kind of make it less charged and make it less personal. So, as an
Mm.
example, you could be like, there's a part of me that really wants to give you a raise and is really excited about supporting your growth. And there's a part of me too that's curious about what I'm going to do from a budget perspective as far as like things in the business, whatever the things are. That wasn't the conversation that I had, but you can have these kind of two truths and then really bring people
Yeah.
in on the journey that you're having in your mind and the process that you're going through in your mind. So you can kind of find a place where you can come together in like deeper intimacy and truth. But this is one of those books where I feel like I cannot wait to read it and get into it. And then also I'm like, can everybody read it? Because
I
it's one of
know.
those things where it can be hard sometimes when you feel like you're doing your best to be processed and be honest and be truthful and like think critically about things. And it doesn't feel like the world is completely caught up with that. And
Mm.
so sometimes it can feel like I'm available for these conversations, but not everyone is conscious enough or in the mindset of mindfulness enough to really have the hard conversation. So sometimes I'm like, dude, I don't know if everyone can do these. So I'm excited to
Yeah,
read the
we
tips.
we talk about that
Okay, cool.
because like there are varying levels of communication and how do you actually connect with others who maybe aren't at that super communicator level, and how do you invite them into like a better communicative
Yep.
experience.
Hmm.
But yeah, in this conversation, we actually started out by talking about communication as parents, like the joys and challenges of it. He just gave like really beautiful insights into like his marriage and how he communicates with his wife, with his son. We talk about the complexities of communication. It's not just black and white and what that looks like personally and professionally. And we talk about, which I found really fascinating and it unlocked some things for me, the types of conversations. So he explains this concept of practical conversations, emotional conversations, and social conversations. So it's really important that we identify what type of conversation we're having, like out the gate, so then we can proceed and have a really healthy interaction. I asked him about like expressing our needs and reading minds because I feel like sometimes in more intimate relationships, you want people to read your mind. And yeah, the communication piece becomes kind of like this chore and like this resentful part of a relationship that you feel like should be better with the communication. We talked about having difficult conversations. How do you set the tone? And he emphasized how we can set expectations at the beginning, which I thought was really, really impactful.
I love that.
We talked about those multiple identities that we're bringing to the conversations. We talked about anxiety and just how that influences how we're able to have these types of conversations, how to ask the right questions, how to notice nonverbal communication and translate that, and so much more. I'm obsessed with him. I love the book, Supercommunicators, How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. And I think you're really, really going to love this conversation.
Yeah, if we think about the jobs that we want, the relationships that we want, the friendships that we want, we're having so many different conversations about how to get those, like boundaries and all of these types of things. But it's like communication is going to get you the relationship that you want. It's going to have the friendships that you want. You're going to have the jobs that you want. You're going to have the career success that you want because it's like the ultimate people skill that really, really just like sets you up for success, sets you up for intimacy, for true, honest relationships, for mental clarity, for peace. Like something that I'm doing now is like no longer reading people's minds as much and just kind of
Mm,
letting them use their words. I'm like, you've got to use your words. I'm not going to like
yeah.
finish your sentence in my mind or like figure it out with my mind. It's like people need to be communicating actually what they want, because I think so often people just kind of rely on, the unsaid or the assumptive, especially with women, because we can always kind of read minds. We can always kind of assume, but no
Mm-hmm.
longer. Mm-mm,
Yeah.
no
My
longer.
husband does that to me. Use your
Can't.
words, please. Maybe it's the Pisces. Thank you to Charles so much. You can follow him on Instagram at Charles Duhigg, and his website, charlesduhigg.com. Please get the book, Super Communicators. And thank you all so much for listening. This is an episode that I feel like would be a good one to send some friends, maybe people that you're hoping to connect with in a deeper way. And if you share, we just really appreciate you. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, follow on Spotify, and watch us on YouTube. If you love watching video, we are there. Every episode is on YouTube.
Come see our faces. When we said a few episodes ago that we were going to start to get uniforms and wear our Steve Jobs, I've never had more people message me. They're like, no, don't.
Really?
Yeah. They were like, no, don't.
Oh,
Yeah, I
really? Too
know.
bad.
I was like,
Too
I
bad.
need a stylist
Sorry.
then, ladies. Because I can't keep up.
That's just too
Morning
much.
Microdose is the Clips channel, podcast Almost 30, and then almost30.com and Almost 30 podcast on TikTok and Instagram. We love y'all so much. I hope you enjoyed this one. I am so excited to listen to this one. I cannot wait. Lindsey did this in New York, and we appreciate you. We will see you on the other side.
Bye. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Oh man, therapy has helped me in so many ways. I've been going to therapy for 7 years. In the last 4 years, I feel like it's really it's been everything. It's helped me through 2020. It's helped me through getting engaged, getting married, having a baby, like moving. It's crazy. And I'm just so thankful. It's the best investment I've ever made and will continue to make. One of the things it's helped me with is comparison. Oh man, we live in an age where we can see other people's lives, the highlights of other people's lives, and like it's hard. It's hard not to compare your life to other people. And we can get caught up in just wishing our life was like someone else's life. But comparison is the thief of joy, baby. And I have just felt like therapy has helped me focus on what I want instead of what others have. And I've just started living a life that I love and I'm obsessed with. And therapy has really helped me to do that. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire and they will match you with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. They make it easy. So find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/almost30 today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/almost30. I was just packing for a weekend trip and I was sure to pack my Symbiotica products because this is what really helps me to stay on my health game, baby. I love their products, not only for their quality, but they also taste amazing. Most of their products are liposomal delivery, which is like a liquidy delivery that makes it really easy for your body to absorb. Plus, it's just delish and easier than swallowing pills, in my opinion. Right now, I'm taking their vitamin C. It's the best I've ever taken. It has this like orangey citrus taste that's so yummy. And it also has biotin in it, which is known as one of nature's most beautifying vitamins. So I've really noticed my skin. My skin has improved since taking this, and it's also great for immunity. I'm also loving their nootropic creamer. So they answered my prayers when they made this. It is creamy, it is yummy, and I add it to my coffee or my matcha, and it slows the absorption of the caffeine. So it just makes like this drinking experience of caffeine in general that much better. No jitters, anything like that. And it has a lot of benefits. So check it out. It's the nootropic creamer from Symbiotica. You can get 20% off site-wide with our code almost30 when you go to symbiotica.com/almost30. That's CYMBIOTIKA.com/almost30 and use the code almost30 at checkout for 20% off site-wide. So I am here with Charles Duhigg. I'm so excited. Like this conversation, and I was talking to Krista before I came here, because she and I consider each other kind of our personal vehicles to better communication at this point in our life. She's my best friend, but we're also in business together.
Yeah.
And both of us have had to learn how to be clear, confident communicators, not only in like what we do as podcasters, because that's kind of a duh, but in our personal and working relationship.
Probably with each other, right?
Oh,
That
yeah.
it's, I mean, sometimes it's funny. The easiest people to miscommunicate with are the people who we love the most, right? And this is what happened to me. I fell into this pattern. The reason I wrote Supercommunicators is because I fell into this pattern with my wife where I would come home after a long day and I would complain about, my boss.
Yeah.
And she very reasonably would give me some advice. Like, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and you guys can get to know each other? And instead of being able to hear her, I would get even more upset.
Yeah.
And then she would be upset at me, right? And of course, like this happens every relationship.
Yeah.
And sometimes the gender roles are flipped, but I started calling these experts and asking them, like, why is this happening? Like, what are we doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing they said is, it's the people that we talk to the most that we tend to stop thinking about how we communicate. And that can be really hard.
Yeah. And I can imagine that there's kind of this misinterpretation of the intimacy where you think that because you're close to someone, close, quote, quote, that either the other person should know what you're thinking or anticipate things, or you hold them to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you hold like yourself to kind of a lower standard.
I think in some ways you do, right? You make these assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting, when I was talking to these researchers, what they told me, and this actually helped me a lot with that question that you just raised about how do we, like, what's the standard we should hold each other to? What they said is, we're living through this golden age of understanding communication because of advances in neural imaging and data collection. And they said, most of us think a conversation or a discussion is about one thing, right? And this is, I think, what happens when we're talking to our business partners, our spouses, our friends. We start talking about, my kids' grades or where we're going on vacation, and we assume that's what we're actually talking about. But what the researchers have figured out is that every discussion is actually made up of multiple kinds of conversations. And then they fall into usually one of three buckets: a practical conversation where we're making plans or solving problems, an emotional conversation where I tell you how I feel and I don't want you to solve my feelings, I want you to empathize, and a social conversation, which is about how we relate to each other and our social identities. And if we're not having the same kind of conversation at the same moment, we miscommunicate. That's what's happened with me and my wife. I was having an emotional conversation. She was having a practical conversation. They're both legitimate, but we couldn't connect. And to your point, I think that sometimes we just assume that the people we talk to all the time, the people who we're closest to, that they'll pick up the cues on what kind of conversation we want to have right now. But sometimes we have to be explicit. Often we have to be explicit. It's
kind of like the unsexy part of communicating. People are like, I just want them to read my mind. So how can, because I definitely have learned this with my husband where I'm like, but can't you just pick up on what I'm putting down?
Right.
And he's I'm not a mind reader. And I'm like,
don't you know what kind of day I had? And
Literally.
he says, and I have no idea. This is the first time I've seen you today.
And also like, expressing what I need in a moment is something that I've like had to literally walk myself through where I'm like, okay, Linz, what do you need? How can you ask for this in this moment? So I guess just on that note, in terms of what types of conversations we're having, how can we understand for ourselves what type of conversation we want to have?
Yeah.
And then also communicate that to the other person.
So the best thing we can do is we can ask each other. So now when I come home after a long day, Liz, my wife, she'll often ask me like, as I start complaining, like, do you want to solve this together or do you just need to vent?
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as she asked me, I'm like, I just want to vent. Like, and it feels so good because like, I wasn't actually thinking about what I needed until that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So the more we get into this habit of asking each other, and they actually teach this in schools, they teach teachers that when a kid comes up and he's having something he wants to talk about, the first thing she should do is ask him, do you want to be helped? Do you want to be heard? Or do you want to be hugged? And those are the three kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
Practical, the emotional, and the social. And I think that your question is a really smart one because how do we figure out for ourselves what we need? Usually the best thing we can do is ask someone else and then know that they're going to ask us back. Mm-hmm. And it's in answering that question that we're often going to say, oh no, I don't need a solution. I just need you to sympathize.
What is that about people that, because I'm one of those people sometimes where all of a sudden I turn into, okay, I'm a therapist.
Right.
And I need to solve this issue.
I can tell you
right
exactly
now.
what's right.
So I think that's also, it's just a good reminder for people that it takes, by asking that question of someone, what do you need right now? Or do you need this or this? It really takes the pressure off of you, this self-imposed pressure of you need to be this to this person in this moment.
That's really smart. I think you're exactly right, because I think part of it is when we do get into that role, that therapist role, and it's because we feel an obligation, right? Like we see someone hurting and like we think that maybe they're asking us for help, but maybe they're just asking us to listen. We don't know. And just by asking, we're doing a favor to ourselves, because we're saying, okay, look, I don't have to solve this for you because I don't know what the solution is. I just need to support you.
Yeah.
Or maybe they say, actually, I do need a solution. At which point we have permission to start thinking about how we work our way out of this issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of the things that we know about supercommunicators is consistent supercommunicators, because we're all supercommunicators at various points. But consistent supercommunicators, they ask more questions than the average person, like 10 to 20 times as many questions. And usually we don't even register it, because a lot of the questions are things like, oh, what'd you say next? Or what happened then? Like to invite us into the conversation.
Yeah.
But some of them are these deep questions that really help us explain what we're feeling or thinking and what we need right now.
What are some of those?
So a deep question is something that asks about it asks someone about their values or their beliefs or their experiences. And that sounds kind of overwhelming, right? That sounds like a big deal. But actually, most deep questions are really easy to ask. They're things like, oh, I know that you're a podcast host. Like, how did you decide to become a podcast host? Or what's your favorite part of doing interviews?
Mm-hmm. So it's like kind of pulling on that, like the heart of it.
That's exactly
and asking
right.
them to go deeper rather than just like, when did you start this? Or kind of the surface level.
Yes, that's exactly. And instead of asking about the facts of someone's life, ask how they feel about their life. That's a great example. If I said, when did you start? How many guests have you had?
Yeah.
What was your favorite interview? But the real question I should be asking is like, why did you start? Who was your favorite guest?
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned from your guests that surprised you? And whatever answer you give me, it's going to tell me something about who you really are.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think, and this is something that I experience still. So anyone out there that's listening who feels anxious when it comes to getting to know new people, and even like getting to know someone that you already know, but you want to go deeper.
Yeah.
I just want to speak to the anxious part of us.
Absolutely.
That like kind of comes to the table. That's like, am I worthy enough to ask these questions?
Yeah.
Do I sound stupid?
Right.
People going to look at me cross-eyed when I ask them these questions? So I guess, what did you find out about that anxiety?
Yeah.
And especially in this day and age when people are like on their phones behind a computer, like they're not out in the real world. That's why I'm so glad this book is coming out, because we do need kind of that help and permission. Like, we are natural born communicators. Like, how do we get back out there again?
Yeah. How do we practice it?
Yeah.
So I think that there's two things going on there. The first is what all the research tells us is people love being asked questions about themselves, right? If I ask you, who is your favorite guest? You're going to love that question.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it can be scary to ask what seems like a deep question. So the easiest deep question is just some variation on, that's interesting. What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think about that? That's never a hard question to ask. And in some respects, it takes the pressure off, the anxiety off, because instead of having to say something smart, all you have to do is ask a question that says like, what do you make of that?
Yeah.
But then the second thing is a lot of that anxiety that comes, it's not because of the other person. It's because of exactly what you said. We feel worried, we feel unworthy, we feel imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best ways to overcome that is an experiment that was done at Harvard Business School. They brought in a bunch of students and they told them, you're about to have a conversation with a stranger, which is of course the most like terrifying thing on earth. And then they said, before you have this conversation, we want you to write down, just take 5 seconds to do this. Write down 3 topics you might talk about. Like the TV show last night, and are you going to the game that's coming up? Where are you going on vacation? And they told everyone to do this. It took about 5 seconds, 10 seconds for everyone to do it. Then they put the cards in their pocket that they just scribbled on, and they had their conversations. The topics that they wrote down almost never came up. But
Really?
every single person said that they were less anxious during that discussion because they knew they had something to fall back on. They knew that they had a question they could ask to fall back on, a topic that they were passionate about. I think sometimes we get anxious in a conversation because of the unknown.
Yes, completely.
And just defining the known a little bit better, it makes that anxiety go away.
That's so true. Yeah, I think about even in interviews.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when Krista and I are in an interview together, and I'll be so like fixated on what she just asked and them answering the question, I forget that like I'm a part of the conversation. Right. And I'm like, then it comes to me and I'm like, yeah, and I have nothing to ask. So just on that note, it has helped my anxiety to prepare for interviews in that way. But in a more social situation, I learn from other people. Like I learn from who I think are super communicators in my life. My husband is one of them, where I listen to him ask questions on the phone or in person. And it helps me to see it, to like kind of register it for myself and what that would look like. And I have some of his questions in my back pocket, when I'm in social situations, because now like in postpartum, I have like a newfound weird social anxiety, like coming back into the world. It's not intense, but it's just like, oh, wow. Yeah. This used to be easier.
Right.
Or I used to care a lot less, or I don't know, or I'm just a different person now.
Yeah. And also like you're kind of overwhelmed.
Totally.
Right? Like part of your brain is constantly thinking about like, just protect the baby, make sure the baby's okay.
Totally.
And it's hard. And you're exactly right. It's all about practice. So our brains evolved to be great at communication. And what's interesting is, so when in this conversation, even though neither of us are aware of it, our eyes have started to dilate at the same rate. Our breath patterns are matching each other. And that would actually be true even if we weren't in the same room together. Because when you have a conversation, your bodies start to match each other. And most importantly, inside your brain, my neural activity and your neural activity is looking more and more similar.
Which co-regulation kind of?
A little bit. It's known as neural entrainment. And it's actually the point of communication. Because when you think about it, if I describe to you a feeling or I tell you about an idea I had, I want you to experience a little bit of that same feeling, right? I want you to experience that idea a little bit. And as you do so, it'll be reflected in your brain. And as our brains become more and more alike, we're more and more connected. That's why having the same kind of conversation at the same moment is so important, is because we need to be using the same parts of our brains. So if I'm having an emotional conversation, which is the deep interior part of my brain, and you're having a practical conversation, which is the prefrontal cortex, it's really hard for us to become entrained because we're using different parts of our brains.
And that's probably why, if I think about conversations I've had where it feels just a little off, or we're missing each other, or I feel insecure because am I providing what they need? Like I'm just saying this so that people listening, if you're feeling like that in a conversation and or in a relationship where you have usual like common communication and you're feeling a little bit off, this could be like a really good reset.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And oftentimes it's as simple as just saying, let's take a beat. I don't feel like we're connecting on this. Like, tell me this thing we're talking about. Why is it important to you?
Good one.
Like, what do you think how does it make you feel, this thing? And like, as soon as they do that, they're going to tell you either, it makes me feel anxious or it makes me feel like we got to get this plan done. Right. And that's emotional and practical. Or it makes me worry about how other people are going to react. That's a social conversation. We can always ask what kind of conversation we ought to be having. The big insight, the big lesson, hopefully from the book, is it's okay to ask. And these are the three choices to look at that are most likely.
And I feel like it also paces the conversation. Sometimes I'll do this with my therapist where I'm like, I will say what I'm feeling in the sense of, hi, I'm coming in hot today. I feel like I'm going to ramble for about 10 minutes, but then I want us to like come down to earth and really ground in what I want to work on today, which is this.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we enter into communication with someone and it's like a runaway train. It's
Absolutely.
like, fuck, I can't, what just happened and where are we?
Yeah.
And so it's like I just love this idea of just noting what type of conversation we're having so we can slow down.
That's exact. And it's an easy habit to get into. I'm having dinner with a good friend of mine named Ben tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, when I was taking a shower this morning, I was like, oh, what are the 3 things I want to talk to Ben about?
No.
And like those 3 things might not come up, but I know that when we sit down, if they don't come up, it's because we're already having a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this habit that I've fallen into.
Love that.
I constantly ask people like, that's an interesting story. Like, what does it mean to you? Because what I really want to find out is like, is this an emotional story or is this a practical story or is this a story about social issues and how you interact with those?
Yeah.
It's so easy to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this. Okay. I also wanted to talk about, before we head into every conversation is a negotiation, which I really love this concept and I want to learn more. The unspoken language that we're using in conversation. So whether it's body language, energy, I don't know what we could be picking up on so that in a conversation, we're able to be clear and we're also able to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
After having picked up on something that's nonverbal.
Yeah. So can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So I know that you used to go to auditions.
Yes.
And you acted. When you would go into that audition, how much did you think about the words you were about to say versus what you're doing with the rest of your body and your face and your vocal tones?
Yeah. I mean, the words were probably 10%.
Yeah.
And then the rest were super important. But I think the sweet spot would be to like connect the two.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And be really connected in what I was saying and how I was holding myself, my body, the awareness of who's in the room or not. You know what I mean? And not let that distract you. So it was always kind of a dance. Yeah.
I think that's exactly right, because if you're doing this well, both your body and your face and your tone of voice, they are communicating the same things as the words you're saying.
Yeah.
That's what makes them seem true and convincing. And the truth of the matter is, we actually do this all the time in every conversation. There's one of the stories in the book is about NASA, and they at one point they wanted to start hiring astronauts with more emotional intelligence because the space missions were going to get longer. So people had to get along for 6 months to get in space together. And they couldn't figure out, the problem is when you get to the final round of an astronaut interview, everyone can fake emotional intelligence really, really well.
Totally.
But they can't fake it for 6 months in a tin can above the earth.
Uh-huh.
So they had to figure out who really had emotional intelligence. And one of the psychologists figured out if he would go in and laugh, and then if the candidate laughed in a similar manner, it was evidence. But well, actually, we're doing it right now. It was evidence that they want to connect. So you laughed, you made a joke, and we both laughed. And what's so interesting is we laughed at basically the same volume with the same intensity. So it's all about this matching, that sometimes he would go in and he would go, ha, 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 and laugh really big. And the candidate would be like, that's really funny. Thank you. And the psychologist knew, like, this isn't someone who wants to connect. This isn't someone who tries to connect.
Okay. So it's almost like a conscious way for someone to validate the other person in a way. So that is kind of like an emotional intelligence.
That's exact. When we laugh in a conversation, according to studies, 80% of the time.
Even if it's fake.
Even if it's fake.
Okay.
Even if it's fake.
Because I've done it.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
If we laugh in a conversation, 80% of the time, it is not in response to anything funny. Totally. Think about how frequently you laugh. When we laugh, what we're really doing is saying, I want to connect with you. And then when someone else laughs back, they're saying, I want to connect back. That's why laughter, and the same is true of talking about something that's sorrowful or talking about something that's vulnerable. There's this phenomenon known as reciprocal vulnerability and reciprocal authenticity. That if I say something vulnerable to you, and then it's an invitation for you not necessarily to mimic me, but just to show me that either you've heard me or that there's something that you can share about yourself.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes a conversation. Otherwise, it feels uneven. We've all had that experience.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Oh my God. Does anyone else dread the what should we have for dinner question? I love to cook and I still dread it because I'm like, oh shoot. I didn't have time to like prep all the things. And sometimes it leads to ordering takeout, which is not the best. It's just not my best option. And I usually end up spending too much money. So I would rather cook home cooked meals without the stress of planning ahead. And Home Chef makes it really easy and has saved me money. So Home Chef provides fresh ingredients and chef designed recipes conveniently delivered to your doorstep to simplify your cooking experience. So you could be someone that loves like classic meal kits with pre-portioned ingredients and easy instructions. Amazing. You might be someone who loves like oven ready kits with pre-chopped ingredients, or you just want to like quickly microwave a meal that assembles in literal minutes. So Home Chef has all of that for you, all of that covered. They provide 30 options a week, a variety of dietary needs, so you don't have to worry about what to make ahead of time. It's really awesome, convenient, economical. You're going to be obsessed. So for a limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners 18 free meals plus free dessert for life. And of course, free shipping on your first box. This is insane. Go to homechef.com/almost30. So again, that's homechef.com/almost30 for 18 free meals and free desserts for life. What? You heard that right. Homechef.com/almost30. You must be an active subscriber to receive the free dessert. Enjoy. Okay, if you're anything like me, you might be wanting to add something to your wellness routine, like usually to like a beverage or like a little snack. I'm just like needing something more. And so when I found Manukora, this is Manuka honey, I was blown away. It is rich. It is creamy. The flavor is very complex. It's not like regular honey, and it has a ton of health benefits. So I will like put it on a spoon first thing in the morning, take it. I will put it on my yogurt. I can put it on ice cream. I can put it on like a piece of toast with peanut butter and banana. You cannot stop me. I am obsessed. So this type of honey is ethically produced by Manukora's master beekeepers in the remote forests of New Zealand. It contains powerful nutrients to support immunity and gut health. And what's really cool is the bees collect the nectar from the Manuka tea tree in New Zealand, and the nectar is packed with bioactives. And the honey that is produced has 3 times more antioxidants and prebiotics than your average honey. So this is really, really special and what makes Manukora unique. A special antibacterial compound called MGO also comes from the nectar of the tea tree. And Manukora is third-party tested. Every single harvest is tested for MGO. So I love this brand. I'm excited to share them with you. Now it's super easy to try Manukora honey. Head to manukora.com/almost30. That's manukora.com/almost30 to get $25 off the starter kit. I would get that. It comes with everything you need. Comes with an MGO 850 plus It comes with an MGO 850 plus Manuka honey jar, 5 honey travel sticks, which I love. I have them in my bag at all times. A wooden spoon that's just so cute and just makes the honey experience that much better. And a guidebook on how to use it, take it, all the things. So that's Manukora, manukora.com/almost30 for $25 off your starter kit. Oftentimes, like if I think back to certain people in my life that have helped me to share more vulnerably, it's usually them sharing more vulnerably first, kind of showing me the way and like also showing me that it's safe.
Yeah.
I think is really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be, let me tell you about the time I killed a man, right?
Right.
But it could be something as simple as saying, like, I went to my kid's graduation and I was like so proud.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of vulnerable, right? I mean, that's real. And it's not depressing. It's not oversharing. And it'd be very easy for someone else just to say, congratulations. Okay, now let's get on to the agenda that we're here to talk about.
Right.
But it's so much more powerful if someone says, congratulations. What did it feel like watching him walk across that stage?
Mm-hmm.
then we're connecting.
Yeah.
And then we can move into this practical conversation together.
Oh, that's
and we're
interesting.
both going to be there for it.
I can imagine that in a professional environment, that is a dance that is probably, I'm thinking about leaders, like true leaders. And I can imagine that really creating space and showing true vulnerability and then moving into the practical is probably 1 in 50 leaders, I would say. Like, I don't think it's something that people do often or well. They are in a professional setting and think I should be professional, quote, quote. So I guess what have you seen in the research about kind of that divide between this is my professional life, this is my personal life, and how can we kind of make sense of both and
Absolutely.
be the best professionals and humans?
I mean, what's interesting is when we talk about this professional versus personal split, there are certainly some topics, right? How me and my husband or me and my wife relate to each other. That's personal. Like,
Sure.
I don't need to, nobody should be asking me questions about that at work.
Yep.
But having a conversation that brings up the possibility of an emotional reaction to something, that doesn't feel like it should just be at home, right? If you're talking about budgets and you're concerned about layoffs and you're worried what this is going to do and it's going to be hard, that's totally appropriate to say. And the same rules apply. The same way that your husband talks to you and asks you, like, look, is this a practical problem, or is this like sort of an anxiety that we need to talk about? We can do that same thing at work, and it doesn't feel overly intimate or overly personal, because communication skills are important no matter where you are. And this is what we know, is that the difference between supercommunicators and everyone else is just that they've learned a handful of skills that anyone can learn. We can all become supercommunicators.
Yeah, I think it seems, at least to me, at points in my life where I'm like, there's no way I could be a communicator like that, or speak like that person, or share like that person. And I do want to demystify it in this conversation, which I think we have thus far. It's like, these are skills just like learning how to feed yourself with a spoon. Like, we just practice. I'm feeding my child at this point. So I'm like, come on, man, hold the spoon.
I know that someday you will be able to hold the spoon. Yeah.
It's just like that. And it does take practice. And do you recommend that people who are wanting to be better communicators kind of out themselves? This is kind of a side question, but it's like, with people that they love and or know are great communicators as well, like, hey, I want to be a better communicator.
Yeah. I think it's a great thing to say. And it also, it's a vulnerable thing to say.
Yeah.
It's a super endearing thing to say. And I think that what'll inevitably happen is everyone will say, oh no, you're a great communicator. You're fantastic. And then they'll be like, but I do remember that one time I brought up that thing and you kind of ignored me, right? And all it does, at the end of the day, what supercommunicators do so well is they just think half an inch deeper about the conversation they're having. And they just train themselves to look for certain things. What kind of conversation is this? Is there a deep question I can ask? And most importantly, they try and show that they want to connect with you. In this one study that was done looking at supercommunicators in groups, they found that when one person, everyone would be making jokes. And then when one person got serious, the next person to get serious was always the supercommunicator. They would say, like, oh, I want to create space for this. You're doing something that feels vulnerable. And then someone would make a joke, and the supercommunicator is always the person who would laugh first.
Interesting.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to give up your own agency. I don't have to do just what you want. I can invite you to also match me.
Interesting.
But it's that alignment, that neural entrainment.
Yes.
And once we're entrained, we can talk about anything because we're moving together.
And I guess I'm curious if some people would say, is that manipulative in a conversation, which I know it's not. But I guess how would you what would you say to that person who's like, are you trying to manipulate me? And
Right.
like, talk
Right.
me about what you want to talk about, et cetera.
I would say, first of all, these are skills, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad, right? An axe can help build a house, and it can also chop someone's head off. So it's really about the person who's carrying it. But the second thing I would say is we've actually evolved a pretty good defense mechanism, which is we have this like hair trigger ability to root out inauthenticity.
So true.
And so there's one of my favorite studies demonstrates this, that the researchers had friends laugh together and they recorded it. And then they had strangers laugh together where they were just faking it.
Totally.
And then they would play a 1 second clip, just 1 second of just people laughing for listeners. And with 90% accuracy, they could tell who were friends and who were strangers.
Wow.
If I try and manipulate you through communication, if it's something you don't care about, sure, you'll let it slide. If we're talking for a minute, maybe I can get away with it. But if it's a real conversation, a meaningful conversation, you're going to pick up on it almost immediately.
So true.
And we've all been in that situation, right? Where we just know that other person isn't listening. They're acting like they're listening, but they're just waiting their turn to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And honestly, I think I can pick up on that so well because I've been that person before.
Absolutely.
Right? Like we've all been those
have.
people
Yeah.
where either we're like thinking of the next thing to say and not really listening, and so we can pick up on it because we've
Totally. Or
done it.
I want you to think I'm smart, or I want you to think I'm
Yes.
likable. So like, what can I say that's really clever,
Yes.
as opposed to really listening to you and connecting?
Exactly. I want to talk about this concept that every conversation is a negotiation.
Okay.
What does that mean?
So what researchers have found is that at the beginning of each conversation, we are engaged in what's known as a quiet negotiation.
Okay.
And we're kind of trying to figure out what the rules are, right? Like, what are we going to talk about? Is this a formal discussion or a casual one? So I might do things like interrupt you to see how you react. I might tell a joke to see if you laugh.
Mm-hmm.
You might get serious to see if I join you in that seriousness. We do this almost unconsciously without even realizing it. And the reason why it's important is because it helps us work out pretty quickly how we're going to guide this conversation together.
Okay.
Now, with any negotiation, there's two ways of looking at it. One way of looking at a negotiation is I want to win. Like I want to beat you. And it turns out that almost every negotiation where we go in with that approach, we end up making the pie smaller. We might get a bigger slice, but we're not maximizing the happiness. The right way to have a negotiation is to say, my goal here is not to win. My goal is to understand what you want. If I know what you want and you know what I want, then we can start deciding like how we parcel out our time or how we parcel out our attention. And this is true whether we're trying to buy a used car or whether we're trying to have a real conversation with our spouse. The first thing that we can do is just say, let's make this a negotiation a win-win. Like, what do you want out of this conversation?
Right.
And here's what I want out of it. And you'll inevitably find there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's similar to what type of conversation are we asking, but it's like going that layer deeper.
That's exactly
like,
right.
What do you want?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And so I guess let's put this in the context of maybe like a personal relationship.
Sure.
Where I guess, have you had this in your marriage where you come to conversations with your wife and like you both are kind of silently negotiating?
Absolutely.
What does that look like?
Let me ask you,
Yeah.
like, think of the last fight you had with your husband.
Uh-huh.
So what happened at the beginning of it? Like, why did it go from a conversation to a fight?
Because I kind of shut down.
Okay.
And I wasn't communicating.
Okay.
Because I didn't know what to say. I was like feeling so much that I was like, I don't know the word.
Right. I can't. And it feels scary probably to put it into words.
He's quite quick with going from feeling to communicating. And I need time.
Yeah. So in that conversation, I've had very similar things where my wife and I once had this like huge, like not screaming, but yelling fight in the hallway of a spa.
Oh, wow.
Where we were like on vacation. It was the worst.
And they're like, shh.
And we were like, we were arguing about money. It was terrible. And
It is a common
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what happens there is Imagine if the conversation started a little bit differently and it had started with you saying, okay, look, I'm going to tell you what I need in this conversation. I'm going to need 10 to 15 seconds before I speak each time, just to think about what I'm actually feeling. Right? Now, if you don't say that and those 10 seconds go by, part of your brain is like, what's he thinking right now? What's like, is he upset that I'm not? But just saying, this is what I need and want from this conversation. And you can even say something like, what I want to walk away from this with is I want to know that you're going to support me, even if you disagree with me. And I want to understand why you disagree with me. Now tell me, what do you want out of this conversation? When the fight starts, if we just take a second to do that,
Good one. Yeah.
it makes all the difference in the world, right? It transforms the conversation.
Because oftentimes, I feel like, especially in romantic relationships and even marriage, where you're like, oh, it's official now, And I remember in those early months of being married, or even like moving in together, there was this protection of our own identity, our autonomy, our life before. I think he was a bit more protective than I was. And I think I was kind of like controlling and maybe infringing on some of his stuff. But I think that tip of just kind of diffusing any preconceived notions about what the other person wants or whatever, it's just like, let's lay it out.
Exactly.
So that there's no surprises and we can have compassion for the other as we're doing this.
And this works for all kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we found is there's few things that are more tense than like conversations about race or politics or gender.
Yes.
And there's been a bunch of studies trying to figure out how do we make those conversations better. And the number one thing you can do is just start it by saying, this conversation is going to be awkward. It's going to be awkward for both of us.
Yeah.
I'm going to say some things in the wrong way and you're going to say some things in the wrong way. And like, I promise I will forgive you and won't hold it against you. But the conversation is more important than the small mistakes we can make along the way. That transforms conversations about race or politics or gender. Because now I'm not worrying about what you're thinking. I know that we're both going to make mistakes.
And usually those conversations escalate because one person thinks the other person said something wrong.
That's exactly right.
We're so worried about it being perfect.
One of the things that, when it comes to race, one of the things that we know is that white participants in conversations with Black friends are very worried they're going to say something racist accidentally.
Yeah.
Which of course doesn't happen that much, but is terrible when they feel terrible when it happens. And Black friends are worried that their white friends are going to say something racist and that they'll have to reconsider the friendship.
Wow.
And the only way that we get rid of that anxiety is not to say, I'm never going to do those things. It's to say, if I do this, I apologize because it's not who I really am. It's not what I really mean.
Yes.
Like, let me know when I say something that upsets you, because oftentimes that means I just need to go back and say it a different way because I did a bad job phrasing it.
Yes. My husband is Black. And at the beginning of our relationship, there was a lot of these moments where I would be so uptight. I'm like, I don't want to say something wrong. And he's like, what do you, he's like, what? He's like, just be yourself. He's like, and be messy, be imperfect. He's like, I'll let you know. He's like, I'm pretty direct. Like, I'll let you know. But like, you can't walk around just being worried that you're going to say something wrong.
Yeah.
That's not like giving me all of you.
Right.
I'm trying to like censor what I'm saying, and it's not a relationship. You're not relating.
Well, and what I love about what you just said is what I heard was you're having social conversations, because this is probably in the context of how do we relate to society? How do we think society relates to us because of the color of our skin? And what he said to you was, don't bring just one identity to this conversation.
Right.
When it gets really bad is when I say, oh, you're a woman, so you must have an opinion on, on X, Y, or Z. Well, the truth of the matter is that just a woman, right? All of us contain these multitudes.
Yeah.
You're a woman and you're a mom and you're a wife and you're a businesswoman and you are a podcaster and you're a friend to people and you're active in your community. All those identities gives you slightly different perspectives on what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And when I welcome them all to the table, that's when we feel really seen and heard. So when your husband says to you, just be your full self,
Mm-hmm.
that's what he's saying, right? Is he's saying, look, the fact that you're white and I'm black, that's like the smallest of the differences between us. So let's invite acknowledge all those other differences. And then neither of us are going to fall into a stereotype.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it's been important for me to kind of, in those moments where I'm feeling awkward, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling like I can't properly communicate because I'm too worried about what I'm going to say. It's literally just saying that, where I'm like, I'm finding that I'm censoring with you right now in this conversation and I don't want to. Like, I want to take a beat and I want to come back to the conversation like fully honest, unafraid to like say whatever.
Yeah.
And it's those resets that help someone like me who like, I think I can get really worked up by how people perceive me. But I think that's been a beautiful healing, like within our marriage where he's like, cool, perfect. Like if that's kind of something that you need to do over the next few hard conversations, let's do it.
You do that.
Yeah. And it gets better over time.
What I love too about that is there's another important principle that I think that demonstrates really well, which is when we are in a hard conversation, when we're feeling anxious, we have an instinct to find something to control, right? And it's natural.
Mm-hmm.
You're on your heels, you just want one thing that you can grab onto that and the easiest thing to control is to try and control the other person, right? And sometimes we do that by saying things like, you shouldn't have felt like you got upset because of that. Like you shouldn't have gotten upset. That's not a big deal. I'm trying to control your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps saying something like, oh, I'm not going to talk about that right now. Like, I don't think that matters in this conversation. I'm going to control the topics.
Right.
What's much more healthy. And in fact, that's one of the things that's known as a warning sign in relationships when people try and control each other. What's much more healthy is to recognize we both want to control things. So let's find things we can control together. Like, for instance, we can control when this conversation happens. If it's 2:00 in the morning and we're both exhausted, let's wait until 10 a.m. to have it. We can control ourselves.
Mm.
And when you say, I just need a couple of minutes, like I'm going to need a couple of minutes to like get in the right headspace, or I need to come back to this conversation. You're not trying to shut me down. What you're saying is, I want to control myself.
Right.
Or you control your environment, right? Or the boundaries of the problem itself. There's this thing in marriage therapy known as kitchen sinking, which is like the worst pattern for leading to divorce, which is we start fighting about where to go for Thanksgiving. And it becomes a fight about like, your mom hates me and we don't have enough money. And that's kitchen sinking. The better thing is to control the boundaries of the fight together and say, let's just talk about Thanksgiving. Like, let's not talk about moms. Let's not talk about money. Let's just talk about this one thing.
Right.
And then you're controlling together.
Yeah, I love that. I think then it's kind of like you both against the problem in a way.
Yeah.
It kind of it reorients you. So
Absolutely.
It's not like hard conversation against each other in a way. But the hard conversation is something that we talked about on the podcast. Krista and I have had many hard conversations together. We've kind of developed this approach where we call it a clearing conversation, where we'll usually go on a walk. So we're moving our bodies. We're not like locking eye to eye. And we're able to just kind of bring everything out into the open, just kind of clear the distortions, et cetera. But I guess, what did you find when it comes to hard conversations? Like the most important pieces to having a conversation that's hard, but also so that both people walk away feeling seen and heard?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And there's lots of fun stories in the book about like CIA officers recruiting overseas spies and inside a jury room. But one of my favorite stories in the book is about this experiment where they brought together gun control advocates and gun rights activists. And these are people who normally hate each other, right?
Sure.
They would just scream at each other all day long. In fact, they were all in the movement. So they all did scream at each other at rallies. And they brought them together and they said, we just want to see if you guys can have a civil conversation. And we're going to teach you a technique before you have this conversation. It's called looping for understanding. It has 3 steps. The first is ask each other questions, deep questions if possible. The second step is once someone's answered a question, repeat back in your own words what you just heard them say. And then the third step, and this is the one we always forget, is ask if you got it right.
Yes.
Now, the reason why this is powerful is because when we're in a hard conversation, there's a part of our brain that becomes suspicious that the other person isn't listening and is just waiting their turn to speak. So what we need to do is prove that we're listening.
Love that.
Prove it. And the way that we do that is by repeating back what they said. We're asking a follow-up question that makes it clear we were paying attention. Oftentimes, we just assume that people know that we're listening.
Yeah.
But in a hard conversation, we really have to go that extra mile to prove that we are, because that's going to make them more willing to listen to us.
Yeah, and it creates just a container of true trust, because I think we have to remember that we're all coming to conversations, relationships as, we have like our little inner children running around, and there might be a part of us that is afraid of being abandoned.
Yeah.
And so in a conversation, you can be abandoned by someone not listening and or totally tuning out or just worrying about what they're going to say next. So it's like, even though that's not a direct correlation to your trauma or wounding, it's like that can totally be triggered in that
absolutely.
moment.
Absolutely. And we've all felt that, right?
Yes.
That like, I'm talking to this person. Am I boring them? Are they like looking over my shoulder to see if there's someone more interesting to talk to? Are they really listening to me? And then think about how good it feels when you meet someone who they say they listen to you, and then they ask a follow-up question. They say, what I heard you say, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, is, and suddenly you're like, oh, like I'm the most interesting person in the world right now.
Yes.
As evidenced by how this person's reacting to me. And it feels amazing.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, if we want to categorize people and what they do. So you mentioned politicians, et cetera. Where do super communicators live in the professional spectrum?
So it's really interesting. When I first started working on this and I found out about the concept of super communicators, I assumed that they would all be extroverts, or they would all be really charismatic, or they'd all be salesmen or saleswomen, or they'd all be CEOs. And it turns out that's totally wrong.
Really? That's interesting.
The reason why anyone can be a super communicator is because there are all kinds of super communicators that are unlikely, right? Usually what's happened if somebody sort of intuits this is that they had something in their background. They had trouble making friends in high school. Maybe their parents got divorced and they had to be the peacemaker. Something that forced them just to think a little bit more about conversation, about communication. And it's that thinking that makes you into a super communicator, because you start to see on your own the skills that you need, or you read a book that helps you understand those skills. And that makes you into a super communicator. So there are super communicators who are introverted dentists, and there are super communicators who are extroverted politicians.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily live anywhere within one place in the world, but anyone you talk to, if you ask them this question, if you were having a bad day and you wanted to call someone who you know would make you feel better, do you know who that person is?
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, they'll say, yes, I know exactly who that is. And that person is a super communicator for them.
Love that.
And some people can be super communicators for everyone, just because they're just thinking a little bit more. They're training themselves and practicing the right skills until it becomes a habit.
Yeah. This is very inspiring to me.
Oh, good. I'm glad. But you're a very good communicator. You're a super communicator.
Thank you. I received that. And I think in my personal life, because this is a part of my job, right?
Yeah.
And I take it very seriously and I take it to heart. And I think in my personal life, because I'm talking all the time on the podcast, I have found myself to be a bit more internal and not have necessarily the energy sometimes when communicating with people to go that just extra inch,
Yeah.
like you were saying before. And it's not that hard, right?
It's not that hard, particularly once it becomes a habit. But the other thing to keep in mind is it's also not necessary every time.
Sure.
Not everything
Sure.
should be a conversation.
Yeah.
Like when I say to my kids, I want to have a conversation about your rooms, I don't actually want to have a conversation about their rooms. I want them to go clean their rooms.
Yep. Yep.
And sometimes we come home and we say to our spouse, like, I just need to tell you something. I don't want to have a conversation about it.
Yep.
Like we can have that later when I'm more rested, but I need you to know about this right now.
Sure.
And I think everyone understands that when you say it.
Completely.
I don't have the time I used to work out. And so I need to make my workouts as efficient as possible. I am a strength training girly these days, and I'm so freaking excited. The gym in my building has the tonal machine. Tonal is so cool. It's the world's smartest, most effective strength training system that helps get you stronger. It is powered by AI. So basically, it's crazy. Tonal learns every rep so it can deliver workouts personalized just for you. It also learns from your movement and provides suggested weight recommendations for every move with detailed progress reports. It's like you have a personal trainer. It's insane. They even create personalized program and workout suggestions or recommendations based on your individual goals. And honestly, like I feel like it works out that you save a ton of money. Like go to a trainer or do tonal. Tonal. Get tonal. Unlike traditional gym equipment, tonal uses adaptive digital weight to advance your training technique. So this is going to save space. This is going to save time. This is going to save money. It's incredible. So right now, Tonal is offering our listeners $200 off your Tonal purchase with promo code almost30. That's TONAL.com and use promo code almost30 for $200 off your purchase. This can fit seamlessly in your home. You will not regret it. You're going to be obsessed with it. That's tonal.com. Promo code is almost30 for $200 off.
When it comes to being a parent,
Yeah.
what have you learned about being a super communicator with children?
So both of my boys are teenagers, which you have a lot to look forward to.
Wait.
It's so fun. It's so much fun. It's also a little hard.
Is it stinky?
Yes. It definitely is. There's a lot of like, hey, what'd you learn at school today? Nothing. Right. So that's when I ask the deep questions. Instead of asking about the facts of your life, I ask you, I notice you hang out with Jasper. Like, what do you admire about him? So the thing that I have learned is when you're talking to a kid, that suspicion that the adult isn't listening is even higher.
Wow.
And think about when we were teenagers, right? And you tell your parents something and you're like, I'm sure they couldn't possibly understand what I was telling them. They don't understand like the social dynamics of my school, the pressures I'm under. And so the more we prove that we're listening, the more they'll end up talking to us. And equally, the more we call those different identities onto the stage and into the conversation, the more they feel seen and heard.
Say more about that.
Well, one of the patterns we can fall into really easily is sometimes these stereotypes are limiting for ourselves. We enter a conversation, it's like, I'm the dad and you're the kid.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, I'm your dad, but I also want to be friends with you. And actually, I have a bunch of friends that I talk to about this stuff. And I have a dad. I was a kid and I'm a brother. And you are my son. But in addition, I know that you're also non-binary and you love the chess club and the debate club, but you also run track.
Yeah.
When we bring all those identities to the table and into the conversation, even just mentioning them or acknowledging them, that's when your kid says, I'm not going to respond to this just as like your bratty kid. I'm going to respond to this as someone who's a runner and someone who is a friend and someone who is on the chess club and someone who gets good grades.
Yeah.
That's how we make people feel seen and heard, is we prove we're listening and then we prove we see all the facets of them and not just one.
Yeah, I think one of the plights I had when I was a teenager was like feeling misunderstood, and I think that's pretty common among teenagers. And also like, I don't know if I could expect my parents to fully understand, but I think to this point, it's like, I am I'm really seeing and hearing not just you who's coming to this conversation, but I know like the multifaceted you
Yeah,
and just really inviting them in, because I think that helps me to understand myself more,
absolutely.
you know, because I think we can be very like myopic too as teenagers where you're like, I'm just this, you know, I'm just this.
Right.
You
right.
forget that you're so many different things and have so many different experiences already under your belt.
And that's where those deep questions are really powerful with our kids. Because again, if we ask them about the facts of their day, they're going to give us one-word answers.
Right.
But if we ask them, you know, what was the best thing that you did this week? Like, what was the thing that if you could, the moment you could go back and relive, what would it be?
Yeah.
Then suddenly we're having a real conversation.
And is this around the dinner table? Like
I do it all the time. I mean, I do it all the time. So
I know. I'm sure they're like, this is my dad, the super communicator. He's got a book out.
They definitely say like, Dad, you can't ask my friends questions when they get in the car. You have to pretend that we're not here. But what I find is when I do ask them questions, everyone responds. They love responding.
Of course. I was going to say, I was like, you'd be my favorite dad. Like, ask me all the questions. I want to be interviewed.
But it doesn't. I'm still embarrassing to them. Whatever I do is going to be embarrassing.
And do you find that your ability to ask them those deeper questions, have you seen them kind of practice the same? In what way?
What's funny is like this asking deep questions thing, it's literally once you start looking for the opportunities, you almost can't stop yourself from doing it. It's so easy to do. And I see my kids doing it too. Like with the other day, one of them was, he had a friend over and they were cooking something together. And he said, you know what? If you could only have one meal again for the rest of your life, but you had to eat it every single day, what would it be? And I was like, that's not a question that a 12-year-old comes up with on their own.
Totally.
But it's a deep question. And they talked for the next 45 minutes about whether Pop-Tarts were better or whether they would have wanted to eat Girl Scout cookies. So it was really nice.
And it's tapping on like the feeling and the emotion, but it's also like pushing them to think critically and think creatively.
That's exactly
which I think we're potentially losing a bit of as we just find ourselves, you know, on our phones more, on social media. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because that's why I think this book is so important. And I have seen it in, I don't know what generation it is, but even with like my brother and like people his age, kind of in that like late 20s, mid 20s, whatever, where they're out in the world now.
Yeah.
They're adults. And also they've kind of grown up with cell phones and computers as a part of their world.
Yeah.
For the most part, almost the whole time. And now this younger generation, even more.
Well, can I ask you something?
Yes.
Because you have a big online,
Yes.
You're online.
Yeah.
How do you feel about being online? Do you enjoy it? Does it feel like a chore? Like what's the good and the bad?
Depends on the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this, I'll just say it because it's honest. If Instagram disappeared tomorrow, if social media disappeared tomorrow,
you'd be okay.
I think I'd be okay.
Yeah.
You know, and but I also know how impactful it's been in my life in a positive way. And Krista and I say this all the time. Our experience online in terms of our quote audience, and really it's like our community, has been so positive and beautiful. And they're so kind and considerate, even if they don't agree, you know, they're just so kind. So for that, I'm so thankful. And I do love being engaged like that online. But when it compromises my own creative process and creativity, it tears me apart. Because I'm like, why do I have to funnel my creativity through this thing? And do I have to? No, right? Like no one's holding a gun to my head. But it's the world in which we live and kind of the industry that I'm in right now. So I have kind of a love-dislike relationship with it.
I think most people do.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is if we were having this conversation 100 years ago and I asked you the same thing about telephones, you would probably say the same thing. Because when a new technology emerges, people forget that that each form of communication has its own set of rules that we have to learn.
Yes.
So when phones first came out about 100 years ago, or became popular, there were all these studies saying no one will ever have a real conversation on the telephone. They'll just use it for like shopping lists and stock trades, like a telegraph. And the funny thing is they were right at the moment. If you look at transcripts from those early calls, people had real trouble communicating because they couldn't see each other.
Huh.
But of course, by the time you and I were teenagers, we could talk for 7 hours a night, right?
7 hours.
Yeah.
I would fall asleep with my phone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's because we learned how to talk on a phone differently than how to talk face to face. And in fact, when people are on the phone, without realizing it, they'll over enunciate their words and they'll put more emotion into their voice because they know the other person can't see them.
Interesting.
Now, the hard thing is we've had 100 years to get used to telephones. Some forms of communication like Slack or emojis or whatever the new thing is, we've had like 3 or 4 years, right? Maybe 5 if you're an early adopter, 7. And so it's really easy to forget that each of these things has its own set of rules.
Yeah.
Our kids learn them faster. My kids know how to use emojis to convey emotion in texts in a way that like, I was like, oh, that's so clever.
Totally.
Right? And what's important is when we're going online is just to take half a beat and say to ourselves, what are the rules for this particular thing?
Yeah.
If I'm talking to you on the phone, I can be sarcastic because you can hear the sarcasm in my voice. But if I'm typing that, how do I show you that I'm being sarcastic? Because you're not going to hear it. You're going to get upset because you're taking me seriously.
Right.
And so the key is just if we take half a second, we all know what those rules are. We just tend to forget them because we're moving so fast.
Yes, the speed.
And if we get in the habit of remembering a text is different from an email, is different from a phone call, then we tend to remember what we ought to do.
Yeah. 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 Oftentimes, Chris and I will be like, let's just hop on a call.
Yeah.
Just real quick. Because even though it's like, oh, do I have to hop on a call? It's like the email back and forth is clearly not working.
Right.
Because we're going back and forth, back and forth. And can we just hop on a call and clarify, hear our voices? You know, we always prefer, I think with what we do too, it's like, I would love for you to hear my voice.
Yeah.
And even on a Zoom, like just see each other, humanize it, just kind of take down any preconceived notions or walls that we might have up where it's like.
And if you get a text from her and it's something where you're looking at it and you're thinking like, this deserves an email in response, or this deserves a phone call in response, or a text in response is fine. Like, hey, that's funny. Haha, emoji, right?
Yep.
It's about being a little bit more sensitive to remembering that the form of communication that we're using matters as much as what we're saying. And so we shouldn't treat them all the same.
So true. So true. I'm curious, just to round out this conversation, in writing this book and doing all of this research and learning what you've learned about super communicators, what part of you has always been a super communicator? And then what part have you really had to work on or practice?
Yeah. I think I've always been good at asking questions. And my guess is you've been good at that too.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
And part of it is because I think we're both curious about other people. The thing that I was bad at was when someone would basically tell me, I need to have an emotional conversation with you, I would rebuff them. So when I was working at the New York Times, I became a manager, and I was pretty good at like the logistics and strategy. But the place where I was not great was at communicating with the people on my team. And often it was because they would come and they would say something like, look, I feel anxious about this, or I feel bad about this, or I feel angry about this. And instead of saying, let's talk about those feelings, let's explore them, I would say, okay, here's a solution. Like, here's what we're going to do to solve the problem. And they didn't want a solution. They wanted me to hear what they were saying and acknowledge, like, it's okay to feel that way. Like it's not right that you feel that way. Like, we need to make a change in order to stop that feeling from happening. And so now I try and do that with my wife a lot, and with my kids. Is oftentimes if one of my sons brings something to me and they say like, here's a problem, or I'm worried about this thing. Instead of trying to solve it, I usually start by saying, like, tell me what this means to you. Like, why is this important to you right now? And inevitably they're going to tell me it's because I can't solve it, which is a practical conversation, or because I just feel worried and I don't know what to do with that worry, which is a conversation about emotions. You don't need a practical solution. Or it's, I'm worried about what my friends are going to think. That's a social conversation.
Yeah.
And those are different kinds of conversations. And once I know what they're looking for, it's so much easier to connect with each other.
I just think about how healing it is just to like, especially as a parent, be able to communicate this way with your children, how they are going to learn how to communicate. I mean, you're literally healing generations forward and back. It's amazing.
It's the best.
And it's just communicating.
Just communicating.
And by just, I mean like, it's everything.
Right. It's like saying like,
it's not just.
It's like just flying, which it turns out it's hard to fly, but you're right. It's everything.
It's everything.
And it's the most important thing we can do. So what we do know is that people who communicate well, super communicators, they are more successful in life. They are happier in life. They get more opportunities. They live longer.
Wow.
One of my favorite examples is this thing known as the Harvard study of adult development, which you've probably heard of.
I actually haven't.
Okay. So for 100 years, they've been following around thousands of people, almost 100 years, trying to figure out what causes people to live longer and be happier and more successful into their senior years. And what they found is that the only good predictor of how happy and successful and healthy you are at age 65 is having at least a couple of real relationships with other people at age 45, which means that you probably started them before you were 45, right? Yeah. That you've been building them for a while. And you don't have to have a ton. Some people had dozens and some people had 2. But having a real relationship, having a deep connection with someone, that matters.
Yeah.
Whether it's your kid or your spouse or your friend or someone you used to work with. And you don't have to talk to them all the time. One of my best friends is someone who I haven't seen in 2 years. We talk once every 6 months, but I love this guy. And whenever we talk, we have a real conversation. Those are the kinds of connections that keep us young and healthy and that make us successful and happy.
Yeah. And I wonder, I guess to piggyback on that, what is the reason? What do you think is the reason why like that is so important to our health?
I think it's because our brain has literally evolved to crave it.
Yeah.
Communication is humans' superpower. It's the thing that allowed us to outperform every other species and to build families and villages and towns. And the people who wanted to communicate, the people who craved connection, they were the ones who lived longest. And so there's a part of our brain that when we have a real conversation, a meaningful conversation, we just feel good.
Yeah.
Because our brain wants us to have those conversations.
And as we know, the mind-body connection is very real.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So you've been doing this for 8 years now?
7, 8. Yeah.
Okay. How have you changed as a communicator after having so many conversations?
I think I've become more attuned to the subtle energies in a conversation, for better or for worse. Whether it's in an interview setting or it's in like a personal connection setting, I find that I'm picking up on what's not being said. And not that I'm assuming that I'm right, but I'm just picking up on something. And so sometimes that moves me to ask deeper questions, sometimes, but sometimes it's distracting to me. So I think in those moments, it's really important for me to like connect with how I'm feeling. Is this making me anxious? Is this actually potential for deepening the connection here? Can I move towards that? And it's just, it's something that I'm always aware of. And I think owning more so what I'm bringing rather than trying to manage the subtle energies that I'm picking up on, which might be what people were feeling coming into this conversation, or maybe childhood stuff, or maybe they're hungry. I don't know. Like I want to be able to pick up on those when it's meaningful for the both of us, but also leave them be when it's distracting from the type of conversation that we're desiring to have.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I think it makes a ton of sense. And And one of the things I hear you saying, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, that I love is you're talking about a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And these same principles of super communicators, they apply to other people, but they also apply to those conversations with ourselves.
Yes.
Sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, am I trying to pretend I'm not feeling something right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I just need to give myself the space to feel it.
Yes.
And to acknowledge that conversation with ourselves is valuable. And we have to prove that we're listening to ourselves.
Yes.
For our brain to believe that we actually are.
And that sounds like kind of the foundation for any type of relationship and or conversation that is at a super communicator level to be able to communicate with yourself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Amazing. This has been so fun. I could talk for hours.
Me too.
I could super communicate for hours. How many people have said, okay, I feel I literally just transported to like a morning show setting where they're like, they have all the yucks and jokes. No, I took it.
No one said it yet. You're the first. You're the first.
They will. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on. This
lovely.
is so much fun.
The book, when this episode is out, the book is Supercommunicators. It's going to be big. Are you ready?
I knock on wood from your lips.
And is it out now?
Yeah, it came out today. It came out today. And
today.
It was interesting. So I wrote this book before called The Power of Habit.
Yeah.
That ended up doing really well. And I got all these emails from people saying, thank you for the book. And I responded to every single one of them, to 27,000 emails.
What?
I know. And so I'm kind of hoping that happens again.
I mean,
it's just so nice to hear when people say like,
yes,
this was helpful.
Yes. I mean, I think because this is applicable for anyone and everyone in every area of their life. It's definitely
I hope so.
A bedside Bible where you're like, how can I use this today? So the book is out now. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles Duhigg. The book is Supercommunicators. You can go to charlesduhigg.com and follow him on Instagram at Charles Duhigg. Thank you so much for just supporting Almost 30 throughout the years. This has been an incredible ride thus far with you all. Please share with friends. We always want new friends. We're not a no new friends type of community. And follow us on Instagram, TikTok at Almost 30 Podcast. We're sharing clips and inspiration and laughs over there.
We love you guys. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.